What's up, folks, and welcome back to Dyce Reacts, where we are staying in Australia tonight. Oh yeah, we are going to be checking out why so many people think Australia is overrated. Housing crisis, high cost, no future. Where on side checks one out. We ain't going to waste no more time. Just going to get right into it, folks. We're going to get right into it. Oh yeah.
Is Australia really the lucky country where everyone wants to live? Or is it massively overrated? Is the Australian dream dead, as many people say? I'm making this video because lately I've been surprised by the amount of online comments, including on my YouTube videos, of people from all over the world, including Australians themselves, saying that Australia is no longer the lucky country it used to be. So much so that many of these people are actually telling me that they've decided to leave Australia and go somewhere else. But is this actually true? Is Australia really overrated? Personally speaking, I've been living in Australia for more than 10 years now, and I've witnessed some of these changes myself. So I'll give you my honest view about these claims, because I know that many of you are actually planning to come here, but suddenly you're reading the news and what people are saying online, and I'm a bit worried on whether you're making the right decision or not. Disclaimer though, my views can be a bit controversial and not everyone's cup of tea. We're also going to analyze what people are saying online and why they have decided to leave the country. Now, as I always say, take everyone's opinions with a pinch of salt, including mine, because everyone's views are subjective in nature. Everything that we say and how we interpret the world is inherently biased and shaped by our different backgrounds, upbringing, values, and overall personal experiences. How I see the world might be very different to how you see it. So if you're thinking of moving to Australia and are still deciding whether to come here or not, this video might be for you. So if you're interested, keep watching. Alright, now the first claim that I'm seeing people make all across Reddit, online forums, is that Australia is overrated because it's boring and bland. People are saying that Australia lacks culture, it's all about the suburbs with little real city vibe, car dependent, and missing a strong sense of community. I'll give you a few examples on what people are saying on Reddit. I'm originally from the UK and have spent time living abroad in mainland Europe and Asia. I've really enjoyed most countries I've lived in, but I've recently moved to Australia to try it out, and I'm honestly just finding my time here incredibly boring. So expensive to do anything and so car dependent that I find I spend so much time driving or just staying at home. And then other people respond, "Hello, I'm Aussie and I agree with you, it's a really boring place, it's hard to make friends, it's expensive, everything is way too far." Okay, so as you can see, this is the kind of sentiment going online for some people, and I get where they're coming from in some way, but I also think that what they're saying is a bit of an oversimplification. It is true that a lot of Australian cities, especially in outer suburbs, can feel pretty samey. Rows of houses, big shopping centers, and not much happening unless you drive somewhere. Compared to places like Europe or Asia, where you can step out of your door and be surrounded by history, markets, and amazing street life. I myself am from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and it is true that when I came here for the first time, when I arrived in Melbourne, it did feel a bit like a town, especially coming from a city like Buenos Aires, which is huge, massive, and there's lots going on. Melbourne feels very small in comparison. So if you're looking for a hectic city life, similar to what you see in London, Buenos Aires, Paris, New York, you're not going to find that in Australia. At least that's my opinion after having lived here for more than a decade. Now, in terms of car dependency and suburbia, yes, it is true. Australia is a pretty car-dependent country. The urban planning of Australian cities is more American rather than European, in the sense that they are not very walkable and public transport connection between suburbs is not great. So unless you live in the middle of Melbourne or Sydney, you're probably going to be driving everywhere. And of course, the implications of this is fewer spontaneous interactions with other people, with strangers, no bustling piazzas or casual cafes where people just hang out all day, as you see in many parts of Europe or South America or in major cities like New York. And because of this, it is true that sometimes there is a lack of sense of community, and it can be tough, especially if you're coming from overseas and you're a migrant. You can feel a bit lonely, because when you go out, it's mainly suburbs. Sometimes there's no one walking around. I already talked about this in another video. So it's pretty quiet in that sense. But if you have a family and you're looking for that kind of lifestyle, then I think that's pretty ideal. And yeah, the truth is that many people here stick to their circles as well, perhaps friends from school, and we don't always have those classic third places where people meet, at least not when you live in the suburbs and not in a way other cultures do. If you're not aware, third place refers to
What you're seeing there from the visuals that I've seen in terms of in the videos, it looks that way. Honestly, it looks that way. Like it's not. I haven't seen like a really bustling place with a lot of activity in the Australian videos I've seen. I've never seen that. For some people, it may be very, very like boredom is gonna kick in if you're someone that likes to socialize in large crowds where there's a ton of things going on. Yeah, I can imagine.
those social surroundings where people have the opportunity to meet outside their home or work, for example, town squares or local cafes, the church, etc. Now, having said that, is Australia bland, as all these people are saying online? No, there's plenty of culture here and lots of activities to do. It just depends on where you look. The Australian food scene is world-class, for example, influenced by migrant communities from all over the world. The indigenous culture here is one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. We have amazing music festivals, exhibitions from all over the world. So we do have culture and activities, some fun things to do in Australia. It's not bland and boring. And now in regards to the suburbs, while they might not have the charm of all European villages, there are tight-knit communities. You just have to make the effort. From local sports clubs to beachside surf life-saving groups, people in Australia do come together. It might just not look like the town square experience that many people are expecting. In my case, I have my sport, rock climbing, and my third place is the climbing gym. That's where I socialize after work. So perhaps you do need to make a bit of an effort to find that third place, find that place where you can belong and where you can feel that you're a part of a community. Now, there's also another funny comment I really laughed when I read that says, Australia is dull if you can't afford it. Life starts over 300k a year salary.
What?
And sorry, but this is a massive exaggeration.
My
You don't need to be
goodness.
earning 300k per year to be able to enjoy Australia. In my case, I'm not rich by any means. I hang out with my friends and we do locals activities. We go camping, we go to national parks, hiking, rock climbing. So you can have fun without having to earn 300k per year. So
That was
overall, I
ridiculous.
understand why some people say that Australia is generic, if you want, especially if you're stuck in the cycle of work, drive, home, repeat. But if you dig a little deeper, through food, art, nature, their places, it's anything but boring. It's just a different kind of culture. And the last comment that I want to highlight in response to all these claims about Australia being boring is someone who said, I'm not sure what state you live in, but in most countries, it depends on the friendships you form. Australia is not different. And they're completely right. Now, the second claim that people are making on why Australia is overrated is that they say that Australia is isolated from all over the world, that it feels like a prison where you're stuck in a bubble, you're far from everything, while Europeans can just hop on a train and be in another country in a few hours. I'll show you what people are saying on Reddit. Some people aren't happy on an isolated, bubble-wrapped island on the bottom of the world. You can have all the privileges you want, but what is it worth if you're simply living in a self-contained and expensive prison? Another one. I'm literally in the middle of the world. He's in Portugal. There is something to be said about being able to fly to dozens of countries and cultures in just a few hours. In Australia, you can do the same and still be shopping at Woolworths. Again, I totally get where they're coming from, but let's break it down because we're not seeing the full picture here. It is true, Australia is far, like really far. If you want to visit another country, you're looking at very long flights, expensive tickets, and jet lag that wrecks you for days. Meanwhile, in Europe, it's very easy to travel around countries. And in Australia, because we're so isolated, it can sometimes feel like we live in a bubble. It is true. Even trends, music, fashion, or business ideas often reaches later than the rest of the world. And there's also a bit of an out of sight, out of mind feeling in that it seems that many people living outside Australia don't even know much about this country beyond kangaroos and the Sydney Opera House. Now, how
True that. When I think about Australia, I just think of kangaroos and dry land. And there's dangerous animals. But this is changing. Yes, I'm learning a lot.
Having said that, saying Australia feels like a prison, I think you're really pushing it. It's an exaggeration, and perhaps this person has some kind of resentment towards Australia, but that's far from the truth. Again, it is true that we are far away from everything, but to be honest, isolation sometimes has its perks. First, because we are removed from a lot of the political and social chaos that other parts of the world have to deal with on a daily basis. We also have space, clean air, and some of the most incredible natural landscapes on Earth. All this without being crammed into tiny, overcrowded cities. And just because Australia is not near Europe, it doesn't mean we're cut off. We have Asia and the Pacific right next door, with places like Bali, Japan, and New Zealand just a short-ish flight away. Plus, domestic travel here is insane. From the Great Barrier Reef to Tasmania to the Outback, you don't have to leave the country to see these beautiful and very unique landscapes. So sure, Australia doesn't have the same backpacking through 5 countries in a week experience that Europe offers, but in exchange, we get a lifestyle that's relaxed, safe, and full of outdoor activities. Whether that trade-off is worth it, that's up to you, and it depends on what you value more and the kind of activities you're into. Okay, now let's talk about another claim that people are making on why Australia is overrated. People are saying that Australia is overrated, and many of these people are actually leaving the country because they're finding that accessing the housing market is impossible. For example, here on Reddit, we have someone who says, "Welcome to Australia, where the median home in New South Wales is 1.2 million for a 3-bedroom, 1 hour outside the city, and a deposit that will cost you $250,000 to enjoy a poorly built house. Can't wait to live." Now, the housing crisis in Australia is a bit of a controversial topic. If you're from overseas, I'll do my best to explain what's happening with the housing crisis in simple terms. The price of property in Australia has gone up exponentially during the past 20 to 30 years. So much so that a house that perhaps was $300K in 2003 today is over $1 million Australian dollars. And the biggest issue is that these prices haven't really kept up with real wages. So today, the average Australian household takes 50% longer to save for a house deposit that households did 30 years ago. So in a nutshell, it's getting very hard for younger generations to access affordable housing in major cities. And the reasons for this are due to a combination of different factors. It's a bit of a systemic issue. The first factor is population growth, which has mainly been driven by immigration, and many people are very angry about this. And what they're saying is that this mass immigration has created a housing shortage. And while this might be partially true, the latest data actually shows that the largest group of migrants in Australia are international students. And where do most of these international students live? In very small studio apartments in the city, in student accommodation or share houses. It's very unlikely that these international students have the financial means to buy a house for themselves. So this basically means that most migrants coming to Australia, which are comprised of international students, are living in the type of housing that not many Australians want to live in. And I know this is controversial, but immigration is only one part of the puzzle of the housing crisis. Now, many of you might be saying, what about foreign investors? Well, that's another issue that's causing a lot of anger, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But foreign investors as well, they've been buying properties in Australia, and now the Australian government is putting a stop to that. They're actually implementing a ban to stop foreign investors from buying property here in Australia, so hopefully this is going to provide a bit of relief. But if we're talking about the overall migrant pool, we have international students who are living in these very small studio apartments in the city where not many people want to live in. So they're not the main contributors and drivers of the housing crisis. The second issue is that there's a cultural factor involved, and this is controversial. I know many people are going to get offended by this, but the reality is that Australia today is leading the world in house sizes, even more so than America and Canada. This is very different to what happens in Europe or South America, for example, where people are used to living in smaller dwellings or apartments. In my case, back in Argentina, I grew up in a 3-bedroom apartment in a building, and we were a family of 5. I had to share a bedroom with my sister, and that was all right. We knew our neighbors, we had friends all over, so there were no issues there. And here in Australia, actually, I still live in an apartment. I've always lived in apartments. I prefer them over houses because they are lower maintenance. But the thing is that I do think that there's some kind of stigma here around living in apartment buildings, living in flats or living in units. You tell me if I'm wrong. That's my perception, that perhaps if you're a family of 4 and you live with your kids in an apartment, perhaps that's a bit frowned upon, or it doesn't convey the status that many people would want. And of course, this is also ingrained culturally, as we said, because the Australian dream, similar to the American dream, dream was always coming here and buying a big house and living in the suburbs. There's also an issue of another cultural movement called NIMBY, not in my backyard, where people who live
Yes. I learned that from George Carlin. Rest in peace to George Carlin. NIMBY, not in my backyard. When I first heard that, I laughed, man, because it's true. It is so true. Basically, what I'm saying, things that can benefit people as a whole. No one wants it in the backyard. Do put it somewhere else. NIMBY, yes.
in these areas, for example, say Brighton in Melbourne, perhaps they're against the construction of high-rise buildings because they say that this is going to bring the area down. So they're a bit concerned about that. And that as well has stopped major developments in these inner city areas. So that's another cultural issue that's happening. And then, of course, there's other people who say that they don't want to live in apartments because they don't want to deal with the owners' corporations, all that stuff. Now, another cultural factor influencing the housing crisis is the fact that today property in Australia is seen as an investment and not necessarily as a place to live in. So many people today, when they buy property here in Australia, when they buy a house, they see it as an investment in terms of capital growth and equity, etc. This means that they expect the value of their land to go up over the years. And of course, the bigger the land, the more capital growth. But when it comes to apartments here in Australia, they don't appreciate as much in value. So that's why as well, they're not as desirable as buying a house because there you have the land. Now, in relation to this, probably you heard that Australia's construction industry is going through some challenges, especially the build quality of some houses is not up to standard. When it comes to apartments, many of them do actually have defects. I remember myself when I was looking at buying my apartment, I was going through this contract of sale, and many of them had major defects. So that's another issue as well that needs to be fixed to encourage people to actually live in these apartments. Sometimes the size of these dwellings is not up to standard as well, or they don't have enough natural light. But I know that all these issues are trying to be rectified by updating the National Construction Code. So hopefully that solves it. That's another reason why some people may be a bit reluctant to buy apartments. And of course, again, you have the issue of skill shortages and not enough construction workers to meet national housing targets. Now, another big problem contributing to the housing crisis here, and this is one of the biggest ones, is the issue of negative gearing. And this kind of relates to the problem of seeing your house as an investment. So the issue is that many people here, especially those who have money or those who have equity in the primary homes, tend to buy houses and apartments as investment properties that they can rent out. And this way they can deduct the loss of these investments from their taxable income. So it's basically people are hoarding properties, investors are hoarding properties for tax benefits. And there's a massive issue with Airbnb as well, where people are buying houses, especially in very desirable locations, just to rent them out for Airbnb. And of course, it puts a lot of pressure in the housing market. And another issue contributing to the housing crisis is the lack of proper urban infrastructure. What do I mean by this? If you search for houses in outer areas further from the city or the beach, perhaps even in regional areas, you'll find lots of very nice and affordable properties. But what's the issue? Not many people want to live in these areas. First, because they are not close to the city. Public transport connection is not great. It's not like in Europe. For example, if you live in London, you take a very comfortable train to Oxford or Liverpool. Here, it's very different. So the houses are affordable, they're nice, they're big, they're spacious, but people, they just don't want to live there. And the reality is that there's not much happening either. To be honest, when you go to some of these areas, they feel a bit like a ghost town. So the problem is that there are houses available, but they are not in areas where people want to live in. And apart from this, of course, you have the issue with interest rates. Again, it's a systemic issue that needs to be solved, both by policy and cultural change. And a similar issue is happening with rental properties. I know that many of you are coming here, so everyone wants to live basically in inner city suburbs, which makes it more competitive, renting a property there. But this happened even before COVID, a few years back. I remember wanting to live in Fitzroy in Melbourne, and I was competing against 20 other people. So rental competition has always been pretty high in inner city areas. And again, this is an issue of demand not aligning with supply. So again, this is a controversial issue. I know that I'm going to get many comments about this. Say whatever you want to say, but I understand that this is not only happening in Australia, but all over the world. There's a housing crisis, population is growing, there's a lot of mobility across countries, and we need to be prepared in terms of infrastructure and culturally speaking to adapt to all these changes. Now, another point that people are making on why they're leaving the country and why they think Australia is
Cost of
overrated
living.
is because of the cost of living. Again, very controversial issues in this video. I'll show you some of the comments that people are leaving online. For example, this guy said Australia is a big ripoff, and then they were saying that the cost of living is impossible and other countries are way more affordable. Went to the US and doubled my salary. Everything is expensive, outrageous prices. Now, let's talk about this. No sugarcoating it, Australia is expensive. Rent is currently high, as we said before. Groceries cost a small fortune, and eating out does feel a bit of a luxury. If you've traveled to places like Southeast Asia or even parts of Europe, it's pretty shocking to see how much further your money goes elsewhere. And as we discussed before, the housing market, especially in major Australian cities, feels completely out of reach for many people, and everyday expenses keep going up. If you're interested in the cost of living here in Australia, I have a full video about that. Now, having said all that, saying that Australia is a big ripoff, I think that's not very fair considering what we get in return. Yes, it's pricey, but we also have high wages, a solid minimum wage, and public healthcare that actually works. In many other countries, things may seem cheaper, but then you realize that you're paying out of pocket for medical care, education, or even basic worker protections. Also, the quality of life here is very hard to beat. Clean air, good weather, beautiful beaches, and a relatively safe environment all come at a cost. But for many, it's worth it. Plus, if you compare Australia to places like London, New York, or parts of Canada, we're actually not that different when it comes to cost of living. So yeah, it's completely fair to say that Australia is expensive, because it is. But is it a total ripoff? I don't think so. Having said that, whether it's worth it or not, it's up to you, of course. And again, it depends on your lifestyle and what you want to get out of life in general. So the main question, is Australia overrated? It depends on your priorities. Personally speaking, I don't think so. I'm quite fortunate to have traveled to many countries all around the world. And in my opinion, Australia today is one of the best countries to live in. Of course, things have changed during the past years, but it's still the best country to live in. It's not perfect by all means, but what you get in return, it's pretty good, I think.
Yeah, this was really detailed. I must say Australia is one of the better countries to live in. If you're someone that loves large crowds, socializing, this is something I haven't really seen in Australia. And she said it's not really common where there's bustling activities the way you see in Asia and those countries, which I love that kind of scenery, that Asian type of scenery as well. And I'm also a half and half person. I love to socialize, but I love to stay isolated at the same time. It's just with a handful of friends and family and stuff like that there. I mean, it depends on what kind of lifestyle you're looking for, especially if you're aging out in terms of getting older. There's so many things that work where a lot of other countries, you're going to have to pay out of your pocket, especially with that healthcare system. Some people may not think about healthcare because they may be young, but when you get older, you certainly, this is going to be top priority. Many things about Australia that's just super good. Some of the things that may not look appealing is like price in terms of the housing and the cost of living. This is something that can affect a lot of people. No one wants to be in a place where the cost of living is just ridiculous, unless you have a limited fortune where none of those things even bother you. Yeah, in terms of the everyday things that you have to deal with in terms of bills, eating, and just having some leisure time. If you're in a position where it doesn't bother you, I mean, Australia is going to be a perfect place for you. Definitely, I'm going to be checking out more from her as usual. But she said she's controversial, and I can see it in the comments. A lot of people have been saying she's exaggerating and stuff like that. But you have to take everything with a grain of salt. If you want to see that long drawn outro that I do, hit me up on Dyce Reacts, where I do music reactions. This is where I'm going to be making my exit. Until next time, peace out.